It's July 17th, 2025. We're here at the Shreveport Bar Center. The Bar Association has a project to highlight, for its history, people who have made contributions to the community, to the legal association, and to the local bar. And today we're going to visit with Ted Cox. My name is Larry Petit. Ted, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Larry. Good to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're going to share some of your life, your achievements, and you've worn many hats. You got one to the side there. But let's start with your general background. Where were you born?
I was born in Alexandria, Louisiana. My dad returned from World War II, and he and my mother married. He actually met her at the Shell plant, Minden. They moved to Pineville for him to go to college at Louisiana Baptist College. And I was born there in Alexandria at the hospital there.
Where'd you go to school? Let's start with your elementary.
He then moved back to Bossier City and became the Veterans Parish Service Officer. And I went to school, started elementary school at Waller in Bossier City. And but he went back on active duty in 1957 in the Navy, and we moved from Bossier City, Louisiana to Oxon Hill, Maryland, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. So I went to school there for about 4 months. Then after some training, he was reassigned to Virginia Beach, Virginia, and this was when I was in the 4th grade. So we moved to Virginia Beach, and that was my 3rd school in 9 months. And we lived there 3 years, and I went to the 5th and 6th, finished the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade in Virginia. Then he got orders going to be assigned to Brunswick, Georgia, which is on the coast. So we moved down there, and so I went to junior high, Jane Macon Junior High, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. Then he got orders to go to Vietnam early in 1964. And my mother was from Bernice, Louisiana, and but she had a sister living in Homer, Homer. So we moved to Homer, and I got to finish high school in Homer, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade.
Did you play any football in Homer?
I played football in Homer High School. My one small claim to fame is I was able to tackle Tony Papa. The last time I talked to Tony, I said, I really didn't tackle you. I just got tripped up in your legs and you fell down. And he always laughs about that.
He was Jesuit High School?
Jesuit High School. What a great athlete he was.
Ted, when you graduated from high school, where did you go?
From there, I started off at Louisiana Tech, and was there at Tech, and then decided to go to LSU, and went to LSU for a while, but that really didn't work out for me. I was not a serious student like I should have been, and so back then, it was before the lottery. And if you didn't have a 2-point average, your grades were sent from the registrar's office to the draft board, and you were reclassified 1A. So I was reclassified 1A because I just really was not, didn't have to go to class every day, right? And but anyway, the best thing that ever happened to me is I went into the Army.
All right, so what year did you go in?
I went in the Army, basic training, in 1967, November of 1967, Fort Polk, Louisiana.
And how long were you in the Army?
Well, I was in the Army on several different occasions as far as active duty, but active duty and reserve time, I had a total of 38 years.
So after basic training, what was your first, where'd you go?
Well, after basic training, while I was in basic training, I decided to take another year. So I took re-enlisted for a year and went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina to start Special Forces training and go to jump school first and Special Forces training. While I was at Fort Bragg, I had the opportunity to play a little football, kind of caught the eye of a West Point lieutenant who had played football, and he asked me if I knew anything about the West Point Prep School. I told him, no sir, never heard of the West Point Prep School. I said, I've heard of West Point because they used to have a TV show, West Point. And so I go back to the barracks and ask the guys if they knew anything about the West Point Prep School. One said, yeah. I said, you ought to go to that to keep you out of Vietnam. So I go back to the lieutenant said, sir, I'd like to go to the prep school. Can you help me apply? So filled out all the proper paperwork. We submitted it, and sure enough, I got accepted. And I went to left Fort Bragg, went to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, to the West Point Prep School.
And what was the West Point Prep School?
Well, they would prep you for a year. A lot of athletes went there. A lot of some of enlisted men who showed some real promise. Again, I'm not sure how I got accepted, but I was playing pretty good football at the time. I'd put on some weight. So I played football.
What position were you playing then?
Defensive halfback. And but anyway, I was at the prep school, Fort Belvoir, but it was an academic program to prep you to make a decent score in your SAT. And so I stayed there a whole year, worked very hard, played football, but I never could. Took the SAT a couple of times. Back then, West Point was an engineering school, and they wanted you to have a legitimate score on that math SATs. And I never could make high enough to get into West Point on the math SATs. So for working hard and staying in and doing everything that I was supposed to, the Army rewarded me and sent me to Vietnam.
When did you go to Vietnam?
I went to Vietnam, got to Vietnam in August of 1969.
Just give us a perspective. What was going on in Vietnam in
Well,
August
of course, at the
69?
time, Vietnam, that 69, it was still, Nixon had come in and said he was going to, we were going to honorably leave Vietnam. He would just put us on a reduction program, so to speak. So when I got there, things were not quite as hot, I guess you could say, as it was after the Tet or during Tet Offensive, 67, 68. That was when we had the most military soldiers and Marines and sailors in Vietnam. But I was with the 173rd Airborne Brigade. They were the first Army unit in Vietnam came in 1965. Right after the Marines came in, the 173rd came in. But anyway, I was assigned there. It was an infantry unit. I was a grunt. I was there 3 months before I got wounded. Combat action. I was medevac. Went to a MASH. You know, you've seen the movie MASH.
Yes.
I went to a MASH detachment. They stabilized me, then sent me to Cam Ranh Bay. I stayed in Cam Ranh Bay about 3 weeks, and from there I went to a general hospital in right outside of Tokyo in Japan. Stayed in Tokyo stayed in that hospital for about, as I recall, about 2 months, and then they shipped me to the States. I went to the Eisenhower Medical Center at Fort Gordon, Georgia. Stayed there for about 4 months, and then they decided they wanted to do some more surgery. I had received a lot of shrapnel wounds. Luckily, no serious orthopedic damage, but had a lot of shrapnel, and so they're doing some skin grafts and all. So they decided to send me up to Walter Reed Army Hospital.
Outside of D.C.
Yeah, that's outside of Washington. Well, actually in Washington, D.C. And so I was there. I thought they were going to medically discharge me, but they did not. They gave me a permanent profile and shipped me to Fort Benning, Georgia. I was at Fort Benning, Georgia for almost a year, and then I ETS'd, came home, came back to Louisiana. My mother was living in Homer, still living in Homer. Went to work offshore. Worked offshore for about 8 months, and then started LSU in the fall of 1971.
In Baton Rouge now?
In Baton Rouge. Now this time I was serious. I went to class every day. I sat on the front row. I took notes, and my grades went sky high. I could not figure out what happened. But I have to give full credit to Drill Sergeant Greenwood, because he was the one that straightened me out, in my opinion. That was during basic training, but I always chuckle and say he was the one who put me back on the right track academically in college.
So you graduated from LSU?
I finished LSU and decided to, I'd taken the LSAT, didn't do that well on the LSAT, So I decided to took the GRE and did well on the GRE, so I decided to go to graduate school at the University of Southern Mississippi. I got my master's in criminal justice. The guy that was headed up the department was a retired Army colonel. I didn't know him on active duty, but I went over there and talked to him, and he gave me a graduate assistantship for the program, and I got my master's there. But while I was there, I always had like to do something else on the side, so I got enrolled in ROTC. Went through the ROTC program while I was in graduate school.
In Hattiesburg, Mississippi?
And at Southern Mississippi. Back then it was Southern Mississippi. Now it's the University of Southern Mississippi. But anyway, I got my when I got my master's, I went on to ROTC summer camp, got my commission as second lieutenant, and started applying for jobs. And I applied to the FBI, or interviewed with the FBI, and also interviewed with the old BNDD, Bureau of Drugs and Dangerous Narcotics. Okay, it's now DEA.
Right.
Okay, but neither one of them were particularly impressed with the fact that I had a master's in criminal justice. The FBI guy kind of chuckled and said, you know, we really don't need someone with a master's in criminal justice. We need either a lawyer, we need an accountant, or someone who speaks fluent Russian. Now, which one of the three do you have? I said, no, I don't have either one. But anyway, so for some reason I decided to go back on active duty. I went back and got my commission, I had my commission, so I went to the military police branch and got assigned, went back on active duty, went down to Panama, to the Canal Zone. This was in the 70s. And very interesting assignment, and but then I came back to the States. But
when you were in Panama, you were Army?
I was Army. I was Army. I was Military Police Corps Army, and I was I was a platoon leader down there and a company commander. And one claim to fame is I went to a military ball and got to meet a guy by the name of Torrijos was the dictator at the time, but the other guy that came in was, gosh, I can't think of his name now. When we invaded Panama, he was the dictator.
And so you met him?
Yeah, I met him. Golly, his name will come to me. He's now dead.
And after that 1 year, where'd you go?
Well, after I studied for the LSAT. I got one of those study guides and studied for the LSAT while I went back to Fort Polk for a year. But in the meantime, I studied for the LSAT and took it again and made a really decent score this time. I said, well, okay. So I applied to law school. Didn't apply to LSU because I didn't have the guts to go to LSU. They flunked out a third of the freshman class, and I was married with 2 kids. So I applied to Tulane and Loyola. Loyola accepted me right off the bat. Tulane did not accept me, but the week before I started to go to Loyola, Tulane notified me, said, we'll accept you. But I'd already decided to go to Loyola. I had talked to some people, and I kind of looked at the school. So we moved to Kenner. My wife was a school teacher, so she got a teaching job there in Kenner.
And you had 2 children then?
And had 2 children, yes.
Son and a daughter?
Son and a daughter. One, they were at that time. One was 5 and one was 3. So they were small kids. But we lived in a nice section of Kenner, and my wife had a good teaching job. I got the VA to pay for law school on veterans rehabilitation, and Plus, for a while, I was in the Louisiana National Guard until it became too demanding, and I decided I either got to decide if I want to stay in the National Guard or stay in law school. So I dropped the National Guard and went in the individual ready reserves. And
when did you graduate from Loyola?
I finished Loyola in 1984, and from there I applied to the DA's office, Orleans Parish DA's office. Harry Connick Sr. was the district attorney, not the junior, but the senior. Matter of fact, I did see the son one time. He was 16 years old at a Christmas party, okay, but that was the junior. I guess I should have got his autograph then. But So I stayed there for 2 years, but then I went on a wild goose chase over to Texas, the Texas Department of Corrections.
When you were at the DA's office in New Orleans, what did you do, just briefly?
Well, when I was at the DA's office in New Orleans, we started out what we call, we all affectionately called it night court, but it was the misdemeanor court and jail clearance. So we've sat at noon, at 6, and at midnight. And it was a section that just handled that. And of course, supposedly you got the next day off after working in misdemeanor court. But and we had misdemeanor trials too. So what was so interesting about that court was particularly during Mardi Gras. When Mardi Gras and you had jail clearance, it's too bad that we never didn't have the opportunity to film some of these characters that came through jail clearance, because they were all dressed up in their costumes. And it was also at that time the Vietnamese folks that came over on the boats. A lot of them moved to New Orleans, and there were some Vietnamese gangs at the time, and they preyed on their fellow Vietnamese, not so much U.S. citizens, but we had there was a serious Vietnamese gang problem in New Orleans at the time, and then one time they had 3 or 4 guys that came through jail clearance, and one of the Vietnamese was able to jump over the railing where they brought in those that were for jail clearance, and was able to run out of the court. He ran past me so quick, I looked at him, and all of a sudden the deputies started, or the police started chasing him, but he was able to get out of the building. Now, whether or not they ever found him, I don't know, but it was kind of interesting.
It was that kind of court.
Yeah, that kind of court, right.
So what brought you then to Texas? You were going to work with corrections?
I knew a guy who I'd been in the Army with, and he called me and said, and you need a little background of what was going on in Texas. A federal judge, Willie Wayne Justice out of Tyler, had declared the entire Texas Department of Corrections unconstitutional. And it was a pretty rough place. They always said that the inmates control the inside and the guards, correctional officers, control the outside. But he said in the lawsuit that was filed, it was just too brutal. So they decided that they were going to bring in some new folks to manage and operate the correctional system. And one of the guys they brought in was a retired Army MP colonel, who I did not know on active duty. But his sergeant major I had known, and he called me and said, "Here's a great opportunity. You ought to come over here." We know he and I had stayed in touch. He said, "I know you got your law degree." So I left the DA's office in New Orleans, went over to Texas, and worked in a place down Rocheron, down in Darrington, and worked with a special master. They were special masters that were put in by the feds to go around and check on these prisons and making sure that they were doing what the federal judge said, when that was to clean up their act.
Is Darrington South Texas? Where's Darrington?
Yeah, it's in South Texas, near Rocheron. So I worked there for about 8 or 9 months. I actually went through the correctional course just to see what that was all about, and it was a great experience. But Governor White at the time was the one who was trying to upgrade the correctional system, and so he brought in some folks from the outside. And there was the governor that a gentleman had been the governor, and again his name slips my memory, but he decided that he was going to run for governor again against Governor White. And I saw the handwriting on the wall. I just happened to be over here in Bossier City visiting my grandmother, and ran into John Mike Lawrence, who was head of the public defender's office, and I literally just ran into him. And I remembered him from New Orleans, and I asked him what he was doing up here. He said, "Well, I run the public defender's office." I said, I said, "I really need to come back to Louisiana. You don't have any openings, do you?" He says, "Yes, I do." So I came back to Bossier City, packed my family up, we moved back to Bossier City. My wife was able to get a teaching job, found us a nice place, and so I went to work as a public defender. Worked for a public defender for about 2 years.
Caddo Parish?
In Caddo Parish, yes. And while I was working as a public defender, I got in the Army Reserve Unit here in Bossier City. In Shreveport, and the Sergeant Major was Charlie Grubb, and he and I became friends.
And Charlie Grubb was city attorney?
He was the city attorney, worked for Mayor John Hussey. And so he offered me a position. So I took that job and worked for about 2 years for Charlie. He was a great boss, great attorney. I learned a lot from him. And but I helped write a grant from the Department of the Louisiana, what they call the Juvenile Justice, their granting agency. And so I helped write a grant to create a narcotics task force. At that time, I was trying to do my best to keep Chuck Gruber, who was the chief of police at the time. Mayor Hussey had brought him in, and he had some issues, and things were kind of difficult. And so I saw this might not be good, and so I decided to take over the narcotics task force. I applied for the job and got accepted. And the narcotics task force had deputies from the Bossier Parish, from Caddo Parish, and then 2 police officers from the Bossier City Police Department and the Shreveport Police Department. And we had a task force. And the purpose of the task force was help somewhat coordinate all the narcotics activities in Bossier Parish and Caddo. Drug activities would cross the Red River, I can assure you. And so I did that for almost 2 years.
And your title was what?
Well, I was director of the Bossier Caddo Narcotics Task Force. Very interesting job. I was actually back in law enforcement, although I still had, still stayed a member of the bar. So Chip Layton, who was an assistant DA for Paul Carmouche at the DA's office in Shreveport, was putting together a drug prosecution section, and he approached me, said, "Would you like to come and be an assistant DA and help me prosecute drugs defendants?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to do that." So I got back in, went back to the DA's office. Mr. Carmouche hired me, and I ended up staying at the DA's office probably for about 6 years. I worked in the narcotics task force. I worked, and then became a trial attorney, an assistant DA in different sections. Prosecuting, yes.
So after you finished up working as a prosecutor, what did you do next?
Well, there came an opening at the juvenile court, and they were looking for a judicial administrator. So I applied for that position just out of curiosity more than anything, I guess. But I really had always enjoyed working with youth and troubled youth. And so I applied for the job. I was not selected the first year, the first time I applied. I made a statement in the interview that if I'm going to be the administrator, then I need to be completely in charge. And the way they had it structured was the director of the detention director and the probation chief would go directly to the judge. And the chief judge at the time was Andy Gallagher. Now, Andy's just a great guy. He's probably the grandfather I wish I'd had. I just love him to death. But David Matlock had got elected and came in and brought in some new ideas and kind of wanted to I won't say upgrade, that probably would, but wanted more or less change some things, and he had some great ideas. And then Vernon Claville got elected. And so after a year, Vernon came over to the DA's office and said, "Are you still interested in the judicial administrator's position?" And I said, "Well, sure." He said, "Well, the lady who was selected over you the first time has now resigned."
So it lasted about a year?
So she lasted about a year. So I said, "Well, yeah, I'll be glad to." I said, "But let me tell you now, I got to be completely in charge of the staff." And he said, "Well, that's what we want." So thanks to Vernon Claville and David Matlock, who, in my opinion, did a great job upgrading the court as far as new programs and the way things were managed. Particularly David, he had some tremendous ideas. He started the juvenile drug court program, which we were first in the state to do. He also was instrumental in starting some other programs. One of the programs we had was what we call work court. Those who were going through child support, it didn't have a job. Well, we partnered with Goodwill, and we assisted them in getting jobs, but we also assisted them keeping that job, because if they didn't, they came back to court. And so he had some great ideas. Anyway,
When did you become the judicial administrator for Caddo
in
Juvenile Court?
97, 1997.
So at that point, you moved from being a prosecutor in the Caddo Parish District Attorney's Office to being an administrator at the Caddo Juvenile Court System.
That's correct.
And so what did you do?
Well, managed just the overall operations of the court. We had a probation department, we had a detention department, we had a clerk's office, and they all came under the judges. Now, the probation department is run by the Caddo Parish Commission. The detention is run by the Caddo Parish Commission, and the clerk's office is run by the Caddo Parish Clerk's Office. But at the time I took it over, I had about 100 employees, 105 employees, and the judges controlled it. The challenge was we were always short of funding. We always, I stayed down at the Caddo Parish Commission, literally begging for money. All right. I mean, we had new programs, like I said, and then Paul Young came on, got elected, and he brought in some great ideas and some changes at the court. He started Truancy Court, which was a great program, and it helped reduce the truancy rate with the school board. But anyway, these new programs cost money, and so eventually it all came down to where the Caddo Parish Commission took over detention and also took over the detention and took over the probation department.
Well, we did want to ask you about detention, though, which is still an issue today. When you became the administrator, how many juveniles would have been in detention?
Well, at that time we were overcrowded, and we went as high as 50, between 40 and 50. And it was, when it was initially built, it was built to hold 28. And you could go up, I can't remember the exact number, but you could go up higher, but you had to come back down within a 48-hour period. And we were always doing that. It was just, the detention back then, I don't know exactly to say what's going on now with the juvenile detention population, but now it runs less than 20, or around 20. They're staying in what they should do. Of course, now the serious crimes, though, particularly the juveniles that have committed one of the serious crimes, murder being the main one, they're housed, if they're 15 and above, 16 and above, they're housed out at CCC.
So when you took over as administrator, that was just one component, though. You had to do a lot with that detention center.
Yes.
To get it up.
Well, the detention center was, the court had been built in 1988. It had been 10 years and no upgrade, nothing had been done, and the place was not as clean as it should be, and I didn't think the kids were being taken as care of and again, it was packed, so we had to work on reducing the population, and we cleaned the place up, in my opinion. I put in a new, the guy that was detention director, he decided to retire and moved out of state, moved to Oklahoma. And then the guy that was running probation, he decided to retire after 6 months. So I had those two individuals retired on me pretty quick. And I was able to select my own probation chief and a detention director. Of course, I guess you could say kind of my team were able to work with me. And but eventually the court decided to use what we call the Jefferson Juvenile Court model, so to speak. That's when the only thing that the judges do down there is that they have their own, they run the court. Detention and probation is run by the parish government, and that's what eventually happened up here. which now that I look at first I was somewhat opposed to it, but now that I look back on it, I think that was the best idea, particularly when it comes to funding.
All right, so how long were you the judicial administrator?
From 97 and I retired in 23.
Now, during that time, though, you were president?
During that time, I became president of the Court Administrators, Louisiana Court Administrators Association, which I was very active in that. And I had judicial administrators around the state, and we were able to get together and exchange ideas on how we do things. So we always worked very closely with the Jefferson Parish Juvenile Court. They had an excellent program. Of course, they had a good funding source too. But we were the first in the state to have the juvenile drug court program. We also had an adult drug court program. Those were two ideas of Judge Matlock. And then we had a work court program. We were the first in the state, one of the first in the nation to have that program. When Reed Casey Jones came in and got elected, she created a trafficking court, young girls who are trafficked, and went out to Los Angeles and took a look at the program they have out there and came back and set the model up here. So we had some specialty courts that deal with certain issues. And
you were the administrator of all of these
yes.
changes and all these implementations.
Right.
But there was a time when that service as a judicial administrator was interrupted. Tell us
That's
about
right.
that.
In 2003, President Bush decided to invade Iraq, thinking that Saddam Hussein might have, I don't know if he had nuclear weapons, but they thought that he might be trying to create some weapons. But anyway, the United States invaded Iraq. All right. I had maintained my reserve status. As a matter of fact, I was in a reserve unit in Oklahoma City, and I was finishing up my command time as a brigade commander. At that time, I'd made full colonel. And so when the invasion started, I called a friend of mine who was in the Pentagon and said, "Are y'all looking for a reservist to be activated?" He said, "Yes, we sure are." He said, "We need colonels." I said, "Okay, well, let me talk to my bosses and just see whether or not they let me release me." So I talked to Judge Matlock and Judge Young, and they agreed, and Vernon Claville, they agreed to allow me to go on active duty for a year. So I went to Eglin Air Force Base and prepped up to go overseas. I first went to Qatar, where Qatar was where the majority of the staff was that overall managed the war effort in Iraq.
Where's Qatar? Where's Qatar?
Qatar is, well, I can show you on a map, but you've heard Qatar, depending on how you want to pronounce it, but it's next to Saudi Arabia, I believe. I have
yes.
to take a look at the map, but anyway, that's where, and we still have the armed forces, American armed forces are still there in Qatar too. But anyway, so I was just sitting around. We had a lot of, we were probably overstaffed. I was looking for a real job. So one day they said, "We need somebody to go in and do an inspection of POW camp in Baghdad." So I raised my hand. I said, "Well, I can inspect a POW camp. You know, how difficult can that be?" But anyway, I did have a correctional background, and I also been a military police officer. Of course, I was in the infantry at the time. So they sent me to Baghdad. I went out and was walking around, going through the POW compound. As I was walking around next to the sergeant, he said, "Hey, sir, I want you to look over there." And so I looked over and I saw there was a tent, and there were a bunch of kids underneath this tent, surrounded by concertina wire. I said, "What in the world is this?" He said, "Sir, these are juveniles who, when they come, these soldiers will come through these small villages and towns, and then they'll pick them up, thinking they might be involved with stuff, and they bring them and drop them off here, and we don't know what to do with them." I said, well, I know one thing. The International Red Cross is not going to be real happy when they walk through this POW camp and see these juveniles underneath this big army tent. He says, yeah, you're right. So I go back, and there's all sorts of advisors in Iraq right now, and we have the Ministry of Justice. And there's a New Jersey judge, 2-star reservist, who had been activated to come over and be the maintenance juvenile justice, or the
When you say 2-star, you talk about 2-star general.
2-star general, I'm sorry, yeah, major general. Okay, I better get major general, 2-star general. And so I go up to him and I said, hey, sir, you got some problems with the POW camp. You got some juveniles out there. He said, yeah, I know, and I just don't know what to do about it. He said, I got this guy from England who's coming over, and he's supposed to be the juvenile justice expert. And I said, well, sir, let me tell you this. I work at a juvenile court in Shreveport. I'm the judicial administrator. And if somebody comes and tells you they're the expert dealing with kids, be careful. Because you never know what a kid's going to do. He says, he said, Colonel, I like what you say. He said, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to make you my juvenile justice policy advisor. I said, well, you're going to have to get me transferred. He said, that won't be a problem. So he picks up the phone, and next thing I know, I'm assigned to the Iraqi Ministry of, or the Ministry of Justice as the Juvenile Justice Policy Advisor. And he said, if the guy from England comes, we'll find him another job. So, but he never did show up. So anyway, I stayed there a year. Had some great stories, war stories, it's not like it was when I was in a PFC in Vietnam. Being a colonel in a war zone was a lot different.
So this was a good time for you.
It was a tremendous experience. It's probably the best experience I've ever had. Well, it was the best experience I've ever had in the military. Probably the only time the Army ever used any of my civilian education, but it was.
What are a couple of things you did?
Well, one thing I did was I got those kids out of that POW camp. I got a school bus and had a driver drive out there. We put them in a school bus and then took them to another location. Found another secured area that had been one of Saddam Hussein's prisons, but we had just juveniles, so we were able to get them in, get them settled, and released a good many of them. Some of them shouldn't have been there, but they did want me to come up with a juvenile detention center. So I went and found a location. It was another prison that Saddam had, but it was a decent, buildings were decent. And so we put the kids in there, had about, I guess anywhere from 30 to 40 kids. And so I was given an engineer officer to work with a contractor to help me improve the location. So I had them build me some classrooms. And I had 2 interpreters. I had a U.S. citizen interpreter who had been, his parents were Iraqi, but they came to the United States way before he was born. So he was a U.S. citizen. And then I had a female who actually was a law school graduate, had graduated from law school in Baghdad. Saddam was a thug, but if you want to give him any kind of credit, he did westernize some of the things in Iraq, and he did allow the women to go to law school. They had a law school. And at one time, Baghdad was considered one of the top academic locations in the Middle East. And so anyway, they couldn't figure out why I wanted classrooms. I said, well, because these kids, while they're in detention center, they're going to go to school. And so I had to figure out a way to get school teachers, and we got school teachers, and we started the classrooms, and the kids went to school, and also there was 2 juvenile courts in Baghdad, and surprisingly, both juvenile courts were headed up by a female judge. Now, there was a reason why, and this was all under Saddam. This was one reason why they had female judges. So they felt that a female judge was a little more sympathetic, showed a little more empathy for the plight of a juvenile. So there was one on the east bank of the Tigris River, one on the west bank of the Tigris River. Well, one was during the invasion, one of the judges had the foresight to put on a guard, and there was no damage done, no looting done to the building or anything. The other juvenile court was, when I went to take a look at it, I was just taken back by, was nothing there but the framework. I thought it had been bombed. But my interpreter said, no, it wasn't bombed, it was looted. And I mean, they stripped that building completely. The most thorough job I've ever seen when it comes to looting. But anyway, I combined the two juvenile courts into one. I got the two lady judges to combine their dockets, and we started the juvenile court up and running. And
did they get along at the?
Well, initially they didn't get along, but we were able to get them some nice offices and put in the computers and nice furniture. And I said, yeah, we're going to kind of give a carrot to both of them, and they agreed to work together. So it all worked out in the end. And then after that, towards the end of my tour, I had about 10 months in Iraq. Went back to Eglin Air Force Base, and
was that when you used the stamp? You were able to get people. You were able to get resources and other things.
Well, in order to get school teachers, according to my female interpreter, I'd had to have an order. And I said, okay, what kind of order do we need? And she wasn't sure. I said, well, I'll just write an order. So I wrote an order, and she says, well, in order for the order to be official, you got to have a stamp. And I said, well, where do I get a stamp? She said, I'm not sure. So I went to the engineer office, the Army engineer office, and I had them create me a stamp. We took an eagle and we made it kind of look like it was an Iraqi stamp, whatever. No one could tell me what the stamp looked like. So we just kind of created one. Then we put some Arabic phrase on it or something. I forgot what we put, something like educate a child well or something. Anyway, we put that on the stamp. Well, then I took and I stamped the order with that stamp. And I took it over to the Ministry of Education, and they looked at it, and they gave me 4 school teachers. Evidently, they felt it was official, which it was official. I just had to create the order and the stamp, all right.
Have you maintained any examples or exemplars of your stamp?
No, I should have brought that stamp home as a souvenir, but I didn't. I figured somebody else might need them after I left. So, but anyway, when I came back and went back in, while I was gone, I had someone who's filled in for me as the judicial administrator.
Now, they asked you to stay longer in the military sabbatical that you were taking, but you decided you needed to get back.
Well, I actually had the judges agreed. Chief Judge Matlock and Judge Young and Vernon all agreed that I could go for a year. And although they did want me to stay longer, but I said no, I need to come home. And
so when did you get back?
So I came back. I got back in March or April of 2004, and started back up as the judicial administrator of the juvenile court.
And you continued until your retirement, as you
That's
indicated
right.
earlier. You do have, I know, something from your retirement.
Yes, I would like to. This was
Got your,
one of the probation officers.
got your
Yeah, be
on.
careful here. I don't. When I retired, the day I retired, one of the probation officers, who was a real good, I wouldn't call him an amateur artist, he's really a professional artist. Anyway, this was one of my retirement gifts. Now, you see that I'm in a black robe. Well, as a judicial administrator, I was also a hearing officer. So for 20 years or so, I was the traffic judge. So if a juvenile got a traffic ticket, they came in front of me. Also kind of a backup when it came to child support, and sometimes if the judges had to take off, I could hear some things. I couldn't determine guilt or innocence of a child, but there were some preliminary matters I could hear. So I was dual-hatted to some extent as a hearing officer and as a judicial administrator. Now, I was also active in the state, as I mentioned, the Louisiana Court Administrators Association, and was one of the few attorneys who was administrator. They had most of the administrators were not attorneys. So, but I was able to not only hear some cases, but also, manage the court operationally.
What about your military? So when did you retire from the military?
I retired from the military in 2005. When I came back from Iraq, I really thought that since I had already finished my command time, that I really wasn't going to be able to find a position, what we call a slot. But the commanding general said, you came back from Iraq, and we had a gentleman who was going to be the assistant division commander, but he's not going to be able to. Something else happened, so I became the assistant division commander as a colonel for right at a year and a half, and then I didn't make general because I dropped the War College. It required too much time. I take my hat out to those who could do the Reserve War College. I just dropped it, but I knew when I dropped it that would keep me from making general. So, but anyway, I had just started a new job, and it was and I was also a brigade commander. Just didn't have the time. I like to sleep 4 hours a night, so at least. But anyway, I made that decision not to drop the Army War College. And but anyway, so you have to retire at age 60, and I retired. But I enjoyed my military career. I'm glad that I stayed with it. After I came back from Vietnam, I was, a PFC in Vietnam. I came back when I started back to LSU. I needed a little extra spending money. The GI Bill wasn't enough, so I got in the reserves and just stayed in the reserves. I was in the Guard for a while, and then got back in the reserves.
So now going back to your retirement, as I recall, you've always kept in good shape, though. You've worked out. Your athletic career has followed you into, older times and older decades. There have been people watching you work out that would just not be able to stay in the gym with you. So, but didn't you do something at the retirement? You had some kind of challenge.
Well, somebody asked me not too long ago. I've had a double knee replacement. I've had a reverse shoulder replacement, and they said, "You sure have had a lot of injuries." I said, "Yeah, all my injuries took place in two different locations." And they said, 2 different locations. I said, yeah, it was either Vietnam or the downtown Shreveport YMCA. And but on my retirement, I retired, and they had a big, really a nice retirement. I was just very honored to. It was at Broadmoor Baptist Church in the big area there, and Adrian Perkins, who was the mayor at the time, came and presented me with what am I trying to say? Something from the city council. Ted
Proclamation.
Cox. Well, proclamation, but it was Ted Cox Day or whatever. Anyway, it was nice of him to do that. And Adrian and I were friends because he was a West Pointer, and he used to work out with me at times. And so as he said a few things about me, I said, well, don't you remember we worked out? And he said, yeah, I used to beat you in sit-ups. I said, whoa, wait a minute. So I went and got 2 mats there, and we put them out, and we had a sit-up contest right there at my graduation, and I beat him.
I've seen the video.
The video is now worldwide, all right? But no, he's a good guy, and but I enjoyed my career as a judicial administrator working with youth. I do think that was something that it was a blessing from God to be able to have that opportunity to work with troubled youth. We had a lot of programs that we did try to turn young people around. They even had started a boxing program. We put them in the Youth Challenge program. I was able to work with some great people, starting with Andy Galler, just no longer with us, but a great man, and then worked with Chief Judge David Matlock, who's now the Secretary of DCFS. He had some great ideas, and it was just really enjoyed working with him. Paul Young, brilliant. He brought in some other good ideas for juveniles. Enjoyed working with Vernon Claville. Shonda Stone was tremendous. She could run a great courtroom. I mean, I was just always amazed at what a great courtroom she managed, courtroom operations. So I was very fortunate to work with some very, very good people who've influenced me, and to this day, I'm just, consider myself blessed to have had the opportunity to work at 25, 26 years at the juvenile court. And
Done well. So in your retirement, when you retired just a little while ago, but what do you do now?
well, my wife is a Texan. She's from Houston, and she announced one day, was I getting ready to retire, she said, "You're not going to bury me in Louisiana." So we chuckled. We had been going over to Jefferson on the weekends sometimes, and the bed and breakfasts. We loved it over there. We both of us kind of flea market. We just, one of my hobbies is I refinish furniture, so I get old furniture refinished. But anyway, we built a house over there. I've enjoyed retirement. Of course, I got 10 acres of land. I cut a lot of grass on my zero turn and weed eat. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to keep that up, but.
Well, you went to Mexico, though. What did you do there?
Well, that was a mission trip through our church, and I actually went back down to Panama on a mission trip, and then went up to Mexico. We have a very active, at the church, have an active missions program, and we went down, one of the probably most rewarding experiences I've ever had. We went down to Zacatecas, and it was a girls' orphanage, and we took a construction team, I guess, for lack of a better description. We took some guys that really knew how to do some work and kind of refurbish part of the church and then part of the orphanage. And I was very good at handing them tools, but we had some guys who really knew what they were doing. So that was just a blessing to go down there and see those youth, see those kids. I mean, it was amazing. Some of those young ladies in that orphanage really spoke excellent English, and actually I was just amazed. And it's just, I'm glad I've had the opportunity, and I do want to go back down there too. This year we didn't have a missions trip, but I try to stay active, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
All right, so let's talk about it. You stay active here at the Bar Center too. You've redone some of the room decorations, and you got the pictures hung. And
well, I'm the official picture hanger for the Bar Association, according to Dana. When she needs something hung, we go up and we try to decide how we're going to do it, and we still got a couple more projects we need to do. But
your children are grown?
My two children. I have a daughter that's an accountant in Dallas, and then my son is a counselor here in Shreveport. And so then my stepson works for Valero. He is in the upper echelon of administration management with Valero, and he's a chemical engineer. And then we have one that has passed away.
So I wanted to kind of end our visit with, the first time I met you was at a Veterans Day luncheon in November that the Shreveport Bar has every year. And you were presenting, you make a memento, a presentation to the speaker each year, or I think you do.
That's correct. I am responsible for making the plaque, the speaker's plaque we now call it, and give it to whoever the speaker is. And we've made some great plaques. I say we, but we presented some really good plaques over the years. John Bell Edwards was the speaker here, I guess 4 or 5 years ago. We made him a plaque. I've done things like mounted Bowie knives on a plaque. We gave one young man who'd been wounded in Iraq and actually was an amputee. He was a Marine. We gave him a Marine sword on the plaque. But we try to give them something unique. And coming up this year, we're hoping, we're not sure, but we've extended an invitation to Governor Landry, so we'll see whether or not he's going to accept and be our speaker. But we've had some great speakers. We've had 4-star generals. We've had a lady that was in charge of the Coast Guard down in, a captain down in New Orleans. We just always try to have a very interesting speaker if we can.
And each year you get to present.
And each year I present the speaker's plaque because I'm the one that either constructed it or had it constructed, okay?
I've watched many of you, and one general in the Air Force asked you were relating your experience in Vietnam, and he goes, well, how did that work out for you, soldier?
Well,
it's a highlight.
Yeah, well, I said, I got my tour was cut short, I think is what I replied, but anyway. But I've enjoyed working at the juvenile court was just I don't know how to describe it other than say it was a blessing. And working with great people, I keep saying that over again, but I really truly had the opportunity to work with some really great people at the juvenile court. And I love Shreveport. Even though I live in Jefferson, I'm probably over here at least once a week. But there were some. I was active with the National Guard Youth Challenge program, and the Strand would always call me if they had any tickets left over and so I would call out of Camp Minden, and the kids would come over and go to the Strand, and they would come over and they would line up. They'd be in their uniform, very respectful, and people who would come by were just so impressed with them. And of course, I'd be standing out there with them. I said, well, you can speak to them, and those going into the Strand would stop and talk to the kids, and it was, yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes sir, no sir. They're just so impressed. And that was a great program that we would utilize with the Youth Challenge program. And
Well, Ted Cox, on behalf of the Shreveport Bar Association, hey, thank you for your service. Thank you for all you've done for the bar.
Well, don't thank me, thank the draft board, okay?
Well, all things work out.
Yeah, that's right.
And what you've done for the Shreveport Bar and the Shreveport Bar Foundation in this building is very much appreciated. Thank you very much for visiting with us today.
No, the pleasure was mine.